Hello and welcome to a new podcast from WeThe15, the biggest ever human rights movement aiming to end discrimination of persons with disabilities, who make up 15% of the world's population. WeThe15, Access All Areas, is made by the same team behind A Winning Mindset Lessons from the Paralympics, which was the award-winning official podcast of the International Paralympic Committee. My name is Andy Stevenson, I'm a sports broadcaster, and I happen to have a disability myself. Join me in this new series as we take a look at society and investigate how attitudes can be changed to create more opportunities for persons with disabilities, as well as improving representation and amplifying a range of diverse voices. We are going to be talking about business and employment now, something that can be crucial to the self-esteem of people with disabilities, the self-esteem of everybody, let's face it. And we are joined by Iulia Brehuescu, Global Accessibility Advisor at the French pharmaceutical company Sanofi. She is helping to drive the company's aim of 100% of people with disabilities having workplace accessibility by next year. And Alina Alam, founder and CEO of Mitti Café in India, a range of cafes run by hundreds of adults with a range of disabilities. Alina, if I can start with you, I've been learning all about Mitti Café in preparation for this interview, and I'm so impressed with what you've created. I've loved looking at all the photos of your staff in their bright yellow uniforms, for example. Can you tell us what prompted you to set up your first Mitti Café, and let us know how it's all developed since then and how many disabled people you employ now?
Andy, having been brought up by my grandmother, who was this stellar woman. Since I was 2 years old, she was the one who brought me up. She had a disability, but all that I could see in her while growing up was abilities. And hence, disability inclusion was very close to my heart, because when I would look at the world and when I would look at how the world would view people with disabilities, it was quite a disconnect than the way this child grew up understanding disability. So I wanted to create a model, Andy, which is visible, but not everybody can see, so tangible, interactive, and the success or the failure of the model should be dependent on y'all, on the community. And what better than a denominator like food to connect people to people? So food is a medium to do two simple things. One is generate sustainable livelihoods, which is okay. But more important than that, being able to create awareness about disability inclusion with every meal or beverage that we serve. And our first employee was this girl who came in crawling for the interview because her family could not afford a wheelchair. If you would give her half a cup of coffee, her hands would shake and it would fall. Today, the same girl sitting on her wheelchair manages 10 other people with disability. She's the manager for our first cafe, and her name is Kirti. As I talk to you, we are at 46 Mitti cafes now and expanding. And together, our team members with disabilities have served over 11 million meals and beverages, thereby enabling us to create awareness about inclusion with every meal or beverage served.
I'd just like to ask you a little bit more about your grandma. So you were obviously very close to her, and you say it was her that was the inspiration to do something for disabled people, because you're not disabled yourself, are you?
No.
So you, just tell us a little bit more about your grandma and how close you were to her and why she was such an inspiration to you.
So when I was 2, my mother had, another baby. And at that point of time, she felt very, very unwell and she couldn't take care of both the babies. And hence, my grandmother, she took charge and she said that, I'll bring up this little one. And she's been the person I have loved the most, in this world, because she's passed away now. So my grandmother, she had a motor disability because of an issue with her spinal cord. She always required support to move around. This was one aspect of her, that she had a disability as a child. That's what I knew. But what I also knew about her were 1,000 other amazing things. She would take care of me, she would take care of herself, she would take care of the family. Of course, she had some additional requirements, which were not, which were absolutely okay. But beyond that, she was just so much more. So when I looked at people and how they would associate a person's disabilities with their entire identity and with their ability to do something or not, was something I was very, it was off what I grew up believing, which was also a reinforcement and a trigger for me to start Mitti Café.
And just one more question for you, Alina, before I turn to Iulia. Somebody setting up a chain of cafes, 40 odd cafes with all of the staff and all of the administration that's required. Setting up 40 cafes would be hard enough, I think, with non-disabled staff. Doing it with the disability in mind, and having all of the staff having some kind of disability, you must have had some people think you were completely mad doing this, and people must have told you this is not going to work.
Andy, I started Mitti with zero startup capital and multiple rejections. So Mitti started off as having cafes within corporations, like so I wrote to many corporations, and a majority of them didn't respond back. The ones who did, they were kind enough to say that we're not confident about this idea, or this idea was rejected at every incubation center across the country. And I think what has really worked for me, Andy, is adamance and understanding that it is 99% implementation, 1% the idea, and often your heart is more intelligent than your head, and you'll know when to listen to it. So when I started Mitti, and I started it with nothing, so I didn't have money, which also proved to be a positive factor for me, because when you have nothing to lose, that's the moment you're your strongest. So I went from door to door, shop to shop, house to house, asking people to join the movement of inclusion, not by giving me money, but 90% of our equipments were donated by absolute strangers. So it is about, leveraging the power of the community to grow exponentially. There is a lack of awareness in the community, which is why we exist. Of course, there were people who said that this is not going to work, but that was the whole point why that was the whole reason why I became even more adamant. And, as I talk to you today, I would say what we are doing is nothing great. Absolutely nothing great. This can be replicated by everyone, anyone, in their own way. It need not be a cafe. Together, our team members with disabilities, Andy, have served over 6 million meals to the economically vulnerable. This started during COVID, thereby changing the entire paradigm that persons with disabilities, given the right kind of support, can not just support themselves, but also support the nation in need and support the global need. So, which is the point that we want to make. Everybody has the potential to join the movement of inclusion. What we are doing is nothing great.
Well, I mean, you can say it's nothing great, but I'm sure people listening will think it's absolutely astounding. I'll come back and ask you a couple of questions about your staff and your customers in a moment, Alina. But I just want to turn to Iulia. Iulia, Sanofi is one of those global international names that we all see on signs and packaging and things like that. But can you just remind us exactly some of the products Sanofi produces?
Absolutely. First of all, may I add that I'm so impressed by Alina's resilience and allyship and everything that you did for the community. You say it's something great, but it's absolutely something great. And I hope everyone gets to replicate it. So yeah, thank you for that. So Sanofi is a global pharmaceutical and healthcare company. We are present in 90 countries around the world, and we have over 90,000 employees worldwide. So the amount of customers and patients that we serve, I can't even comprehend the number of people that this company serves in terms of medicine, vaccines, with employment and so on. So we have a very strong focus and very large footprint in R&D. Some of our areas of focus would be diabetes, immunology, oncology, neurology. We also develop and produce and deliver consumer healthcare products, so every sort of medicine that you can get over the counter. Yeah, we also have quite a lot of legacy in clinical trials as well. So that's a little bit about what Sanofi is doing.
And you are the Global Accessibility Advisor for Sanofi. So that must be a huge job. And I know that the corporation has a huge aim, doesn't it, by 2025? Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So a few years ago, just to kind of step back, we developed a global diversity and equity and inclusion strategy. So we had a lot of ambitions set in our strategy that are due to 2025. But to zoom into disability, inclusion, and accessibility, our goal is that 100% of people with disabilities have workplace accessibility by 2025. I would argue that this is a sustained effort. We're extending that ambition beyond 2025 as accessibility as a practice is an ongoing journey, and there are always areas where you can improve and add to that. In my role, I focused basically on 3 to 4 areas. First would be workplace transformation. So I get to partner with our workplace experience teams. That would be facility management, architects, all the teams that are focused on the built environment. We've been assessing since 2022 our offices and start remediating for accessibility issues. At this point, 96% of our offices have been audited and remediated, and we have brought all of them to a high level of accessibility. We have different levels that we rate against, and so they're all acceptable as of now. This year, we also extended our ambition to improve our manufacturing and supply areas and laboratories. Now, those are very complex environments for some people with disabilities to work in due to health and safety. However, we were able to identify how we can improve that. So that has been an ongoing process and at the very beginning as well. Another area of my job would be partnering with the digital teams and ensuring that everything from a digital perspective, specifically focused on employee experience, from applying to a Sanofi job, going through the interview process, getting your tools when you join a new job, everything from that perspective is accessible. What that means is obviously testing against web content accessibility guidelines, ensuring that we have at least our tools in place. Now, we did this work again through development of a standard as well. We also focused on ensuring that we have a comprehensive design system, that we again test and audit our websites, our tools, and developing an assistive software catalog. I also focus and nurture our Ability Plus employee resource groups. We have communities of employees with disabilities, caregivers, and allies across 22 countries. And that's very useful for me to understand the disability state of specific countries, and also accelerating my work and forming that sort of community of belonging and feeling, psychologically safe, knowing that you have a community where you can turn to. So they've been really, really essential to my work.
I imagine that's actually quite hard to come into a company where you look and you see so many things that you want to do to try and improve things. Has it been quite difficult to get the messages across, or have the staff at the company been welcoming to your ideas?
There's definitely a challenge because obviously my role is global. So in a global role, you will not see immediate impact. Things will take a little bit more time that you want to, right? So I also rely quite a lot on allyship and influence and making sure that people, as Alina said, join the inclusion movement. Something that I realized it really works for us is having, a top-down, also a bottom-up approach. So in Sanofi, we do have a lot of leadership commitment. So we do have an external diversity, equity, and inclusion board. So we have, in that board sits the CEO, half of the executive committee, and then we have 3 external diversity, equity, and inclusion representatives. And so that movement alone is very, very important because we have, leadership commitment, and we know that there is support coming from above. But then through the communities, we can initiate those grassroots initiatives through awareness, keeping leadership accountable, making sure that, whatever we do within the digital or workplace experience space, it actually serves the disability community, right? So we work with them to make sure that we create those environments and not just saying that we did something. So I think those two approaches really work really great for what we're doing right now. And basically I sit right in the middle, right? So I get that feedback from the community, and then it is my responsibility to go to the leadership and make that kind of bridge that gap between the community and business, and the other way around.
Alina, I imagine a lot of people listening will be wondering where you find your staff, because I imagine now they might be coming to you because Mitti Café has been so successful. But in the early days, where were you finding your people, and also how were you making reasonable adjustments for them in your cafes?
So one is our recruitment for both our training programs. So we have an experiential training program because a lot of our candidates with disabilities, they may not know how to read or write, having not had access to going to school for multiple reasons. For example, a lack of accessible toilets, etc. The economic condition not being that great. So this is quite common, from where I'm speaking from. At the very beginning, as I mentioned, I went from door to door, house to house, shop to shop, asking people to join the movement of inclusion, but also giving out these vacancy pamphlets, which is how, I found Kirti, who was our first employee. Today, our recruitment happens through a larger network of non-profits who are partner organizations. So a lot of our recruitment happens through that network. We have a lot of referrals that happen. We also rehabilitate a lot of candidates with disabilities, Andy, from the roadside, because we do provide them with accommodation, logistic, fooding, medical attention. So we believe everybody has the potential to do something. And we've seen this over the years. Every day is one such example. Another example is that of Kotappa. Kotappa's got dwarfism and he has got a speech impairment. He was left at our training center by his family, and we've not been able to track them for the last 4 years. This said, we've realized that Kotappa, he's great at art. So now his work is actually displayed at our various cafes, and he's become an entrepreneur. So I think the possibilities are immense, and it is the underdogs who've outperformed expectations more. Now it's no more a surprise. We know everybody has the potential. It's just about nurturing it, and you will see magic. Also, to make the spaces accessible, I think accessibility is not just a privilege; it is every person's right. All our cafes are accessible, and a lot of people feel that accessibility is expensive. Sometimes, yes, it may be, but not necessarily always. For example, having detachable ramps, having your menu in Braille, or having your instructions in Braille, it costs nothing, but it is so empowering for the other person, or a customer with visual impairment, or any of our candidates with visual impairment. We have placards, to communicate. We have basics of sign language displayed, across our cafes, where everybody can pick up something or the other. And we always believe that communication need not just be verbal. There are so many other ways to communicate. It's just that you need to have the intent.
And Iulia, with your disabled staff, I don't know if you can put a number on how many disabled staff Sanofi employs, but with your disabled staff, are you able to make reasonable adjustments for people when they have accessibility requirements?
Absolutely. I wish I could give you a number. We do not have a global number as of now. We do a lot of reporting at a global level, but I would argue that the number of disclosure doesn't accurately reflect the number of people with disabilities. And I would say there are multiple reasons, but one of them that I come across is that in many countries, disability is defined in a different way. So I think one of the things that we've been focusing on at the global level, and it's coming later this year, we will be doing a global demographic survey where we're trying to identify our disability data through self-ID. But through that survey, we actually defined what accessibility is, and we gave examples. What disability is, what we consider disability being at the global level. We gave examples so people are able to maybe identify in themselves if they have an anxiety disorder. maybe that is considered a disability as well. They don't have to be registered disabled with the government because, that's, in some countries, that's something that it's mandatory for someone to be able to disclose their disability at work. So we've been focusing on that this year, and it's coming later this year. So we'll have more accurate data on that. And then a second part is obviously we do have government quota. We need to ensure that 6% or 5% or 3% of our workforce in specific countries is registered as a person with a disability. So obviously we do have more clear numbers within those regions, but it's not consistent globally.
Sanofi is a French company. We're here speaking on the WeThe15 podcast, and WeThe15 is intrinsically linked to the Paralympic Games, which are, of course, coming to France in Paris this summer. Has the Paralympics and the WeThe15 campaign with the games, on the horizon, made a difference to Sanofi and actually, other French companies you might look around at, Iulia?
Absolutely. We have, I think, over 2,000 volunteers, Sanofi employees, that will be helping at the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games. So we did roll out last year a disability etiquette training, and we focused on main disability types and how to interact with someone with a disability, how to talk to them or speak or offer help and so on if it's required. But also we added quite a specific section for the Olympic Games, how to identify someone who might have a disability within a crowd. And that's because we want people to, be proactive and inclusive outside of the workforce as well.
And I know, Iulia, you've worked in accessibility for a long time. Have you seen, not just at Sanofi, but going back in previous roles in years gone by, have you seen a general improvement in this area?
There's definitely an improvement. So in my previous organization, it was a very different industry. And so we were a creative agency where we were offering our services to clients like Sanofi and big corporations. So I was a little bit on the other side of the fence. So how our accessibility program developed there was through grassroots initiatives. We formed an internal task force, and we started mapping, how can we offer this to our clients as a service, and how can we influence them? Okay, we delivered this website to you, but did you know that you can make it more accessible? Then you set up your requirements to do. So that was a little bit more, I was pushing on the other side of the fence for accessible environments, and it was very much focused on digital. I think in the past years, I did saw businesses realizing that, obviously it is the right thing to do, and it's also good for their business. However, I just think we have such a long way to go, because if we think about it, small and medium businesses have, I think, the most power in employing a workforce because there are so many. But on the other side, they have less, budgetary resources to invest in disability inclusion and accessibility practices. So obviously, as a large organization where Sanofi has been around for 100 years or so, we're a very established company. And of course, we can dedicate resources and improve our environments and do assessments for 100 offices and making sure that, we improve as we go every year. But I can realize that maybe small to medium businesses don't have the same amount of resources. So maybe taking a step back and focusing on things that are impactful for their business instead of dreaming. So yeah, I think sometimes starting small and building from there also helps.
Yeah, I think that is a very valuable approach. I just want to go back to Alina. Can I ask about your Café's customers? So would I be right in saying that the majority of your customers won't have a disability? And how do they respond? When somebody walks into one of your cafes, do they even notice that your staff are disabled? You must have had all sorts of reactions to that, good and bad.
Absolutely, Andy. And that's the whole reason why we exist, with the hope that we won't need to exist someday. It is about being able to create as much awareness. I'll give you one simple example. So I walk into one of our cafes and I get this person who's super angry. He's like, are you Alina? Are you a part of Mitti Cafe? And I said, yes. And he points to, this boy who was at the counter. He says, this boy, how rude he is. The way he talks to me. He says, samosa, how many? This is the way he talks to me. And I listened to him patiently and I explained that this boy's name is Bharat. His expressions may not be doing justice to how amazing he feels within, to his amazing story and the struggles that his mother, his family had to undertake to get him to where he is today. After years of rejection, after years of bullying, after years of being told that the son is not good enough, and here he is standing and selling this to you, and the pride that it gets to his mother and to him, and the fact that this particular customer, and I mentioned it to him, that how important the community is towards changing Bharat's life. I explained Bharat has got autism. Not all disabilities are visible. There are hidden disabilities. And I explained, what autism could entail, what are Bharat's strengths and weaknesses. Now, this person went away. Coincidentally, I happened to walk into the same cafe a couple of weeks later, and I see this person, and I just, I refrained from going directly in, just imagining what is going to happen next. And guess what? So this person, he's gotten another, I think friend of his, and he's introducing Bharat, giving Bharat a high five. So perceptions can change, and I have innately always believed that compassion and courage are two weapons that can eradicate any problem, Andy, that our world faces today. And that, apart from a few black sheep that exist, it just exists innately in the community. Hence, awareness is the key.
Because in general, Alina, attitudes towards disability in India, are they improving? I've interviewed one or two Indian Paralympians in the last few years, and they have spoken about how things do seem to be changing, but Mitti Café do seem to be at the forefront of a move towards much more acceptance towards disability. But I mean, of course, you do paint a magical picture, and that's your experience. But I guess we have to accept that for some people disabled people in India, life will still be very, very tough.
Yes. I'd agree with that, Andy, and a majority of our candidates, along with having a disability, as I mentioned, they have never had access to going to school. Again, disability leading to, poverty. So that cycle, the vicious cycle, it's all interconnected. And also, if you're a woman with disabilities, it's an additional layer. This said, we've had candidates who've gone through absolute hell. For example, Bhairappa, he's got dwarfism, motor disability, and mild intellectual disability. And of course, he had never gone to school. So when he had come in barefoot for the interview with a torn t-shirt. And he was rejected at 80 plus jobs, which is post that we got lucky in finding him. In his village, he was considered a child of ill omen. That is a child who brings in bad luck, because of which, the villagers believe that his mother passed away because of him. And I mean, throughout his life, he didn't have friends because the villagers won't let children play with him. They would never go near him. Fast forward many years later, he went on for so many interviews, got rejected. Finally, we found him. And fast forward today, he is our team lead. He's leading our entire team at our cafe at the Bangalore International Airport. Not just that, Andy, when Bhairappa came in, and with many of our candidates, for the world to see their abilities, that will eventually happen. For us, the larger challenge, Andy, is to show them the mirror to their abilities after years of rejection, being told they're not good enough. Now, Bhairappa was told he will never find a job. Now, he's found a job, become the team lead, great. He was told something even more painful. He was told that because of his disability, nobody will ever love him. But fortunes change, and he met Rupa at our other cafe, and then they got married. So we have 27 plus love stories at Mitti Cafe that have translated into marriages. So love has no boundaries, disability being minuscule. And these are the stories that, wherever I go, I say that, these should not be extraordinary stories. We should remove the X from it.
But do you then go to other Indian companies, larger companies, like, say an equivalent size company to Sanofi in India, for example? Do you go to these bigger companies and say, look what we have done, you should be doing Not just you could be doing the same, but you should be doing the same.
Andy, that's a larger purpose. So we are currently present inside Infosys, Wipro, Accenture, Wells Fargo, EY, and many, many other larger multinational corporations. And whenever we set up a Mitti Cafe, that is with the objective that it has to exponentially generate more livelihood opportunities within that ecosystem, change perceptions within that ecosystem. That is why we exist there. So after we coming in, we bring about a lot of sensitization, a lot of hiring for people with disabilities that gets accelerated after we go in and we show them, the magic and the abilities of our team members. A lot of our competing vendors, Andy, they hire persons with disabilities after looking at what we do. So the best part about what we do is there's no competition. And, the more the competition, conventionally, the better it is for us and for the purpose.
I just want to build on what you said, because it's such an important topic, and you referred to attitudinal barriers in India. But I would argue this is still quite pervasive at the global level, quite a lot. I think companies have the impression that, if we have an accommodation process, that should be enough for people with disabilities, to come and work for us. But I would argue that how people react around people with disabilities, the lack of awareness across the workforce population around disability inclusion practices, obviously the long history of stereotyping and misconception around the disability really is one, if not one of the main factor in excluding people with disabilities from specific roles or projects or career advancement. I think that, sometimes on the other side of the coin, people's intentions are really good. They really want to help people with disabilities, but it ends up being too hurtful or discriminatory when you want to overhelp someone. A common example would be helping with a person with a disability in the workplace by overhelping, like opening doors or retrieving items or touching their wheelchair or assistive technology, always offering to help them. I feel like it really strips away their individuality. And I think there should be a little bit of a balance of focusing on how your workforce is including, people with disabilities within their roles and projects as well, without undermining their autonomy or being patronizing in any sort of way.
How can you go about kind of combating that, Iulia, as in an ordinary person doesn't exist, but just if you took a typical person on the street, no disability, I sometimes think that they don't realize that, for example, coming up and pushing somebody in a wheelchair without asking, they don't realize that can actually be very, very rude. How do you go about changing that attitude?
Speak up as much as possible. Obviously, there is a place and time. One of my personal approach, if I see someone, doing something that's not appropriate or saying something such as, I don't know, I'm so OCD, I'm so ADHD, even though they just did something that's more like a personality trait and it's not something that they actually experience, I just try to explain them in a way that is constructive. If it's like in a meeting with more people, maybe I will not do that because people will get defensive and they will try to, it's not, they'll try to defend themselves, but maybe I'll have like an individual conversation with them. Now, I'm one person, so obviously I can't be anywhere. So creating, allies and making sure that they understand that they also need to speak up when they see this type of behavior is really crucial in, changing the culture of a company, I think.
And Alina, a lot of what Iulia is saying there is the equivalent of you standing up to a customer in the shop and saying, well, no, hold on a minute, that person behind the counter has a particular challenge, or et cetera, et cetera. But obviously you can't be in all of your 40-something cafes all of the time. There must have been some bad experiences as well. Obviously we've spoken a lot about the amazing, like they are truly magical things that are happening in your cafes, but there must have been bad times as well. There must have been times where a customer has been incredibly rude to a member of staff. and you haven't been there to stop that.
I think very valid point, Andy. And, in fact, I'd agree with a lot of things. In fact, everything that Julia mentioned, that is, allyship. We need to make inclusion as inclusive as possible. Making people realize that inclusion is not just for the person with disability, but it is a cause, that belongs to everyone, for the right, logical reasons. So I knew that I cannot be at each of our cafes every day. In fact, as part of our experiential training program that we have, we absolutely have this as an integral part of our skilling as to how our team members can explain their own cause in in the best way possible. So it is, when we say we've served 11 million meals and beverages, 11 million bills that we've generated, it is 11 million plus times that our team members with disabilities have been able to interact with people. It has been 11 million opportunities for us and counting to be able to create awareness about inclusion, that cause and concept that our team absolutely owns. For us, a cafe is just a medium. It could have been anything. Food is just a medium. Chai is just a medium. But the ultimate aim, and for everyone who was at a Mitti cafe, whether it's Bhairappa, Rupa, Sabiha, Kirti, Lakshmi, for them, they know that, with every customer is a potential to change the life of many, many more people with disabilities. So they absolutely own the cause. And, as Iulia mentioned, that it is often a bottom-up approach that works best. When there is a sense of ownership that exists within the team, it is just incredible. That is the only sustainable way to scale. Hence, today we've been able to scale to 46 cafes. In the next 2 months, we will expand to 11 more cafes. Today, so Mitti is present inside corporates, colleges, hospitals. We are present inside the Supreme Court of India. The Chief Justice of our country inaugurated the cafe, thereby sending a message to the entire country about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had Swami Gowda, who's another candidate of ours. He's holding on to, the hand of the Chief Justice and getting him to Mitti Cafe, and we were not in the frame anywhere. Such is the message that went to the entire country. In the next month, we are starting inside the Rashtrapati Bhavan, which is the official residence of the president of our country. So strategically putting ourselves at locations that matter, where we could create awareness, having our team members with disabilities who are also our change makers in the forefront, and they have this ingrained, always helps, and that's the way we've been able to scale, and I have been able to become irrelevant.
Iulia, one of the issues that crops up a lot, I think particularly in Europe, I might be wrong, but we hear a lot about disability pay gap, and we hear about a pay gap between men and women, of course, as well. But the disability pay gap, is that something that you are, working towards closing that gap at Sanofi and other places you've worked in the past?
That's a really important question. This is not particularly my role focus, but part of our D&I strategy was to kind of close that equity gap, which right now is only focused between, men and women. And I think globally, we almost got to 50-50. And so I think there's progress on that, but I'm not involved into that movement.
Alina, are the staff at your Mitti cafes paid the same as, say, a non-disabled person might be at a different country, or does it not work like that? Are there reasons why that might not be possible?
Definitely, one needs to follow the rule of law. There are regulations, fortunately, that govern the wages that need to be given out. This said, by far, we've been able to pay above what the market wages are, and the progress has also been phenomenal. Candidates who have started off as trainees have become trainers. Candidates who started off in the housekeeping team have become managers. Irrespective of whether they have had an educational backing or not, an experience or not, but we've seen candidates climbing up the ladder.
And Iulia, when we're coming towards the end, so I think we should sort of look ahead to the future here to close. When you do look ahead to the future, not just this year with the Paralympic Games coming to France, but way into the future, do you feel as though accessibility and diversity and inclusion are just going to become much more accepted parts of every single workplace?
One would hope so. But yeah, I think we did see an increase of commitment for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, accessibility. There's so much more to do. Even looking at my project and Sanofi, there's always ways we can enhance and improve. I think one of my hopes, particularly zooming into the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, is to make, if you have a body, you need access to healthcare, right? No matter if you have a disability or not. But in particular for people with disabilities, it is increasingly more and more difficult to access healthcare in some areas. We do have a global initiative that's called A Million Conversations, where we're trying to rebuild trust in healthcare and underrepresented communities. Before we started this initiative, we did a survey where we interviewed people from underrepresented communities across the world to see how, about their experience with the healthcare industry in specific. The highest percentage, where 73% of people with disabilities told us that they don't have trust in the healthcare system because of, bad experiences, because they don't have access to it, and so on. Obviously, this is quite concerning because you would argue that people with disabilities would be, the first community to have access to healthcare in general. So my hope for the future is to ensure that healthcare as a whole is as accessible as possible, that we have the right representation as well, seeing more people with disabilities as healthcare professionals, and having, that disability vocabulary to talk to people. People that have a disability can be healthy as well, right? So knowing that you don't have to always fix someone, but knowing to listen to them, knowing that they might have a disability, but they might also have multiple disabilities or mental health issues as well. I think it's an important step for our humanity going forward.
Because disability and the healthcare industry are so closely linked, it does feel that actually healthcare pharmaceutical companies should actually be leading the way on all of the things we've been talking about today.
Absolutely. And are we leading the way? It's a question for us and other pharmaceutical companies, but hopefully we're making progress. And I think focusing on having that consistent approach and making progress over being, perfect in everything that you do in terms of disability inclusion will lead to, a more inclusive world, and also influence other companies to kind of follow as well.
And Alina, you mentioned that the future does involve expansion in India.
Absolutely. So, of course, the aim is to reach out to the billionth Kirti across the world for whom economic independence and dignity is not yet a reality. There are millions out there who would never have access to doing it just because, of their disability, just because they're, a woman with disability, just because they've, not been able to show their talent because of inaccessible infrastructure, the disability in people's perception, which is it is heartbreaking. Yet, it is a duty for us to be able to do whatever bit we can.
Well, thank you both. It's been brilliant speaking to both of you and hearing about what's happening both at Mitti Café and Sanofi, two very different organisations in terms of scale, but you're both doing fantastic work and keep it going, and you're both very much embodying the WeThe15 principles. So well done, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having us, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
Well, I hope you agree. Two really inspirational guests there talking about business and employment. They certainly gave me plenty to think about, and I'm sure the same will be true about next week's guests, talking about the entertainment industry. I'll be speaking to Keely Cat-Wells, a disability rights advocate who is now making space for people with disabilities in the TV and film industry, and Keith Jones, who is a hip-hop artist with cerebral palsy who helped create Crip Hop Nation. Join us then.